The second main topic that I mentioned that I'd be talking about this lecture are these concepts of mass culture, as well as the culture industry. Sorry, see, sometimes we all blink a little bit. One of the great things about the what's known as the Frankfurt School, the Frankfurt School refers to an area in Germany, Frankfurt, a particular university where a lot of intellectuals were quite active in the 1930s, and even after, especially after the post-war era, just after World War II, trying to make sense of the politics and economics of Europe at that time. So known as the Frankfurt School. They're some of the ones that give us the best insight to these ideas of mass culture as well as the culture industry. In particular, two of the most well-known intellectuals that were part of the Frankfurt School are Adorno and Horkheimer, whose snippet of an article we're reading for this week. Adorno and Horkheimer basically escaped the Nazis in the 1930s from Germany, fled from Germany in order to stay alive. But as being Germans and being attuned to what was happening in Germany, they were very familiar with this name, and you've probably heard of it before, Joseph Goebbels. Joseph Goebbels goes down in history as basically, if not the inventor of propaganda, the perfecter of propaganda on a massive scale using new media, whether it be radio, films, records, broadcast, all these sort of things. They were aware that Goebbels' work on behalf of the Nazis had been absolutely crucial to creating the legitimacy of the militarization that was happening in Germany, as well as the beginnings of discrimination against Jews, and eventually leading up to the extermination of Jews in World War II. What they realized was that media that Goebbels used could be used to send a massive amount of messages, could create a very uniform, strong message that could be projected to people. And it could kind of come in contact with people in all aspects of their lives, their radio, in their home, at the movie theater when they go out for a night on the town, on billboards or newspapers as they head into town for work that day. So they are aware of, if you were to kind of mechanize and bureaucratize the latest technology, that you could really generate quite strong messages that are oriented towards one interpretation of reality. I might mention that in 2005 there was a really terrific movie that came out, you might be able to get on Netflix, called The Goebbels Experiment, and it actually is a reading of Goebbels' diary and letters. He was quite a writer during all those years, and is a really kind of haunting view within his own psyche and his own kind of view of the world. I highly recommend it if you get a chance or are interested in these things. What the Frankfurt School does for us, in effect, is that a big difference from Gramsci is Gramsci really never honed in on the fact that in advanced, industrialized countries, especially in Western Europe and in the United States, there really had been developed this unique part of the economic structure, and often connected to the political structure, which we could call the culture industry. So these are all those forces of people that design, create, package, advertise, and make happen all sorts of types of media that you and I are very used to, but at least back in the 30s were quite new. So Adorno and Horkheimer focus on this particular zone, coming to call it the culture industry, or that's the term that we'll use to talk about this zone. So it's a particular zone of producing cultural content, particularly through media, and that's what they kind of have a laser-like focus on. But in their examination of the culture industry, they have a number of kind of arguments that they make. First, and you'll catch some of this in the essay that we read for this week, they were really concerned that the Enlightenment, which had been also known as the Age of Reason, and which seemed such a promising time for the development of the use of reason to make humanity better, to know humanity better. They see that the Enlightenment is kind of a high point in the history of Western civilization, where truth was pursued through the beginnings of the scientific method and through developments in philosophy and free thinking. And they see the Enlightenment as the basis for all sorts of notions about human inequality, for notions of democracy and political participation. So they see this as really kind of a high point. They then kind of quickly survey what's happened since the Enlightenment, particularly what they had escaped and what they saw happen with World War II. And they basically say that the Enlightenment project, as it's known, has failed, that Western civilization has failed to live out what was best coming out of the Enlightenment. And instead of the Enlightenment, they argue what we have is bureaucracies, so the increasing bureaucratization of life and massive companies. They feel like we have kind of a society that they call a mass society. So huge numbers of people, all of whom are growing to have uniform thoughts about the world, that they've become dependent or at least pliable by powerful forces of politics and economics, and that people in these advanced democracies, the populations are overwhelmingly passive. Now, it's not too shocking to think these things when you think that they do a lot of their writing right after the horrors of World War II, where clearly mass societies were great at creating mass violence, where there did seem to be a dependency and a passivity and a kind of a uniformity of thought, particularly in some of the aggressive warring countries in World War II. But they take these concepts about mass society and they argue that what we have now is mass culture, a mass culture of stuff produced by the culture industry. Now, in case you doubt whether there is a kind of coherent, solidified, powerful culture industry today, take a look at a link. I'll insert a slide right here. Which shows you, this is from 10 years ago, so this data is old, but a PBS investigation on media monopolies, which shows you that the vast majority of media companies and media distribution channels are owned by really kind of a few small corporations. The best, of course, Rupert Murdoch. And you can see that some of the problems with this sort of centralization of power and resources and ability to mold and shape messages that come out. You can see some of this in just the latest scandals about the tapping of phones in Europe and even the United States by various members of Murdoch's media company. And they argue that this culture industry that is helping to produce this mass society, the culture industry pumps out certain movies, shows, themes that have certain characteristics. First, they all appeal to the lowest common denominator. So kind of bland plots that don't have any of the sophistication of great literature from the past. They pump out stuff that people will enjoy and want more of. So it's almost got like a drug addiction feel to it. It's sugary sweet. We like to ingest it and we'll always come back for more the next night. And that this industry centralizes cultural creativity. So in their eyes, the centralization of media in the culture industry has absolutely demolished local creativity. So instead of having local bands at the local dance hall with great singers who might sing in the church on Sundays and the dance halls on the weekends, now we've got American Idol, where all talent is somehow channeled upwards in this bureaucratized process that's meant to supposedly reveal the best. But what it really does is it actually crushes the ability for artists, all sorts of artists, to have viable creative lives unless they make it all the way to the top. So they have these analyses of the culture industry and mass culture, which could really kind of help us think about the nature of mass culture today. And key to their argument was showing that the culture industry, first and foremost, is about profit. Now, in case you doubt this at all, you should look and realize that the marketing model or the business model for both Google and Facebook now is totally driven by their ability to sell ads. It's not the services that Google provides. After all, they provide YouTube to you for free. They provide you your Gmail for free. They provide you Google search for free. So how is it that this company is one of the most profitable of the last decade and that everybody wants a piece of? It's because they sell advertising. They basically sell platforms for the ability of messages to get out, messages about participating in buying mass culture. So in this, in Adorno and Horkheimer point out, what's happening is that audiences for the culture industry are first and foremost consumers. They're not thinkers like they were in the Enlightenment. They're not citizens like they are in the best conception of democracy. They're not brothers and sisters as they are in the best conceptions of religious traditions and traditions of social solidarity. Instead, it's about consumption. And for Horkheimer and Adorno, they see it as passive reception by audiences, that because of these mass culture, audiences are really simply receivers. They passively receive messages and they escape into consumption. Now, this is a pretty, if you haven't been able to figure out, a pretty critical argument about the nature of culture in society, in a modern industrialized society like ours. So we want to think a little bit more about what some of their implications are for what they're saying, and this is what they talk a lot about in the article. And this is also one reason why I focused the discussion question as I did, so that we can kind of play with these ideas and see where they seem to work, and then maybe also see where they seem to not work. Let me pause for a second here. I'll come back, do a little bit more explaining, share an example or two about Horkheimer and Adorno, and then we'll wrap it up.